This is Let's Talk, getting to the root causes of the important issues of the day. This on-air community forum believes your voice matters and welcomes all thoughts and views without judgment. Please join today's conversation by calling 415-663-8492 or tweet us at Let's Talk on KWMR. Well, gracious, my name is Charles Schultz, and whenever I'm in Point Reyes Station, I listen to Charles Schultz on KWMR. I'm here today with...
What's her name?
Shelley. Oh, that's it.
Yes, Shelley Rugg.
Raise that, yay.
There
we go.
Is. And who's that next to you?
It's Stephen with an N.
With an N, I see. Stephen.
Nurwitz.
With an N.
Yes. Steve N. Hurwitz.
And I'm Paul A. Raffel.
Ah.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm
what
stuck in this voice now.
What's a Raffel?
What's a
What is a Raffel?
So what is the topic?
People have grappled with that for so long.
Is that the topic? That's
American
the topic.
poverty. What brought this on? Well, there was a, let's see, who is it? He was from the UN. Oh dear, it's so far into this thing. Sorry about that. I should have highlighted what it was. But there's a representative of the UN toured America on the very day that the Senate started voting on the new tax proposals. He was touring U.S. Started in L.A., came up to San Francisco, went down to Alabama, and went to Puerto Rico, and then to West Virginia. It took all in about 9 days,
Wow.
studying poverty, and was disgusted and appalled, and said that poverty in the U.S. is on a higher level than a lot of so-called third world countries, and here we are.
Wow.
You know, the leading light of richesse in the world. Skid Row, yes, he started on Skid Row, and according to this, which was in The Guardian, there are 50,000 people living on the streets.
Oh my gosh!
And I think that's just in LA, of course.
They can't just sweep them away.
Oh, they've tried. Daryl Gates. Oh boy. 41 million people in America live below the poverty line. 41 million people. Of those, 9 million have zero cash income. So these are the people who are basically on the streets and making money by asking people for money or by doing, recycling cans and bottles and things. 9 million people with absolutely no income. Oh, and one here, of course.
What is this? Hold on a second here. I made $35 last week.
Skid Row has now, thanks to kind people and LA actually stepping up just a little bit, and because of an outbreak of hepatitis A, Skid Row now has 9 toilets at night for 1,800 street people.
Oh my gosh.
That is a ratio well below that mandated by the UN in its camps for Syrian refugees. Surge in house prices, of course, all that. He came to San Francisco and went to the Tenderloin and walked into St. Boniface Church, and there were people sleeping, about, 60 people or so, sleeping on the pews in the back of the church while others were praying at the front of the church. The church welcomes them, but none of the others do. It's the only place of worship in San Francisco that welcomes homeless people, and in fact, they're locking their doors and
Say the name of the church again.
St. Boniface.
Okay, people can donate to them
In the Tenderloin, and of course, they're putting out the little horrible knobs to stop people sleeping in the doorways of the churches, and those wonderful things. Ronald Reagan set the trend with his 1980s tax cuts, followed by Bill Clinton, whose 1996 decision to scrap welfare payments for low-income families is still punishing millions of Americans. Thank you, Bill. Black people are 13% of the U.S. population, but 23% of those officially in poverty, and 39% of the homeless are black. So way above their portion of the of the population.
But Paul, aren't these poor people just losers?
Yes, they are. An ongoing epidemic of hookworm in Alabama, which is an intestinal parasite found in Africa and South Asia, but had been assumed eradicated in the U.S. years ago. No. Lowndes County, Alabama. 70% of the households in the area deposit waste on open ground, and the rest have defective septic tanks that back up in heavy rains. It goes on and on. And, of course, Puerto Rico, twice the proportion of people in poverty than the rest of the U.S. That was before the hurricane. 44% of the people were living below the poverty line before the hurricane. Now it's something like 60%. So there we are. We like to think of ourselves as...
I'm glad you didn't bring this up before breakfast.
So, and here it is, Christmas.
Oh.
We're all, how do you show love for your friends and family? You buy them stuff.
When you see Tiny Tim, kick his crutch away. That's what I say.
You talk about poverty. There's also people that live paycheck to paycheck, so at the end of the week, they don't have any money either.
Right.
There was a study done, and there is nowhere in the United States that anyone working on the minimum wage in whatever state they're in can afford a one-bedroom apartment at the going rate.
Nowhere?
Nowhere
Ridiculous.
in the United States.
Not even in Sandusky, Ohio?
Well,
Check it out.
Would you want to live in Sandusky, Ohio? But I mean, they say if it's relative, if it's relative, right? They say that low income for Marin County begins at $102,000 a year of income.
Yeah.
And to buy a house in Marin County, you'd need to have a household income of $244,000. Right. So I mean, relatively speaking, anywhere other places in the country, you'd be doing quite well if you're making $102,000. But apparently, in Marin, you're just scraping by.
In the yes, exactly,
Yeah.
and in the second congressional district, which is San Francisco, and then all the way up the coast to the Oregon border, including us, 12.7 people under the poverty line. The poverty line is for a family of four. They always say for a family of four. Why? $24,340 would be the poverty line for a family of four. 12.7% of District 2, our district, are below the poverty line. Working age women, of course, are worse off everywhere across the country. They're far more impacted by poverty than men. Of
So
course.
why are we talking about
that's why a lot of women are starting their own businesses.
Yeah.
So they can be their own boss and hire other women, and a lot of that.
More power to them. Well, I'm living check to check. I know that.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I'm living check to check off his check. It's two people on one. Two. I don't know. I mean, they say if you look at, say, these other kind of metrics, say 12% for District 2, but they say even in Silicon Valley, 25% of the population is food insecure. They have to go to food banks, et cetera, or they... talking about not knowing where your next check is coming from, not knowing where your next meal is coming from, and that's in the richest place, in the country. Yeah. What does all this mean?
What does it all mean? What do we do about it? Give us a call, won't you?
Yes.
If you have a solution to poverty in the U.S., please give us a call. 415-663-8492.
I think the solution is something that we're never going to do, and that is to cut the defense budget and redirect that money. We have enough money for free college education, free health care, the things that everybody says, oh, look at Denmark, how great it is. They're not spending their GDP on weapons.
Right.
It's as simple as that.
Right. And, of course, we're going to have how much? 1.6 trillion less in the budget now?
You got me.
Well, we just need to work harder.
That's right. And these poor people need to stop being losers.
Stop spending all our money on cigarettes and
cigarettes
women.
are delicious.
Cigarettes, women, and gambling. That's what that senator said.
Yeah.
Those poor people, they spend all their money.
Why are
We're
they
the women
poor?
in gambling. All I'm doing is spending money on cigarettes.
They're poor because the people
people got it good.
who hire them for jobs are not paying them a living wage.
Right.
At the very least,
Right.
a living wage.
Right.
And yet they have more money than they can really use in their entire lifetime.
Yeah.
Well,
Well, I mean, I think part of it is that the economic ideologies that dominate our time and have done for many decades now love it when there's a huge reserve of labor. So that, anybody who wants to unionize, anybody who wants higher wages, et cetera, you can get rid of them and hire somebody else.
That's disappearing.
Right.
The labor shortage. Walmart had to raise their wages because people were finding other opportunities to work rather than for them, so they upped their wage. There is actually going to be a shortage of workers in the coming years. Unemployment is as low as it's been, and I think what all these jobs that our president wants to create, there aren't going to be the workers to take those jobs, really.
Well, I mean, it depends. They say 100 million people are not in the workforce. There's a Bureau of Labor Statistics to find somebody who's out of the workforce, somebody who's been unemployed for a certain period of time and is no longer seeking employment. 100 million people are out of the workforort?
No, you're saying a third of the...
Look it up.
Look it up, please.
It sounds crazy. I agree with you. It sounds really strange.
Impossible.
Well, I mean, the Bureau of Labor Statistics makes lots of ludicrous claims. I agree with you. But I will look that one up. I'm thinking, the thing is, everything in Walmart used to be made in the United States. Now, the only thing, that Walmart is doing to employ people in the United States is those people that are working at that particular store. The greeters, yeah. But all the products inside, the T-shirts, the this, the that, the agricultural products, used to be made here in the U.S., and now they're not.
Yeah, but in reality, we've become a service economy, and if you want to be in service, for the most part, you need an education. So you'll find the people at the poorest level, the people who are making the least, have the lowest education level. So if you want to alleviate poverty, one thing is to make the community colleges tuition free. That would help.
Yes.
And find ways, incentives for people to get an education, because that is probably the easiest way to out of poverty.
Have schools that are public schools, free schooling for young children. We're moving away from that, of course. We're going to charter schools, which are, giving parents more choice.
No, it's really...
At the same time, HUD is cutting their budget by $6 billion.
Charter schools are really a way to funnel federal funds to religious schools. Essentially, that's the impetus behind it. But...
This really hit me emotionally. I mean, it hit me really hard last night. I just feel like, this is our country. This is America. And the people who are at the top right now are trashing it and everyone and everything for their own benefit. And it's just... It's mean.
So
I've been doing it for decades.
You're saying you
And
don't believe the Republican Party when they say that this is going to make these corporations invest more into and create more jobs?
No, it's been proven
heavens.
over and over and over that the trickle-down theory does not trickle down.
I am shocked by your cynicism.
Do you know? Who coined voodoo economics was actually George H.W. Bush on the campaign trail in 1980. All right, 93.8 Americans are out of the workforce, but that does include 37 million over 65 and older.
Okay.
So there's some people who are retired.
And children?
No, the definition is 16 and up who are deemed not to be in the labor force. So it's 93 million people who are 16 and older. A third of those are over 65, but of course many people work well past 65. And then the rest, another 60 million people, are between the ages of 16 and 65.
Well, how many of them are in college, for example?
Well, maybe, but I'm saying when people say, "Oh, unemployment's at an all-time low," well, if you take 60 million people out of the equation, if you include them, then unemployment's huge.
People who are not claiming unemployment benefits. That's the only statistics they have, right?
I mean, like I said, in the definition is nuanced, but the Bureau of Labor Statistics uses, so it includes people over 65, blah, 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 blah. But I think it's you have to be actively seeking a job and be over like a 6-month period or something like that. And after that period, you're out of the workforce by their definition. So when you hear unemployment's at 3%, well, maybe not. I'm not sure really the economy has recovered very much since the financial crisis. For the 1%, for the top 10%, sure.
So if you're
times are
seeking a
great.
job, and let's say you have the skills to get a job, if you're seeking a job and you haven't found one in 6 months, what does that say about the need for labor in this country right now? That means if that's what's happening, that means there aren't the jobs to go around for all those people that are seeking them.
We
Certainly
could go
not
to another
paying them.
country
So
where
it-
they hire.
So to that extent, then the president's right. We need more opportunity for jobs.
Well,
And this will do it.
No, not necessarily, but he might be right about that.
needing more jobs.
Yes, more
Well,
jobs. for
sure.
people.
It depends what is the job, too. Making $10 an hour at Walmart?
Right.
I mean, is that...
Because- yes.
I mean, it's my thing. I have a problem with the fight for 15. It's like, well, you're still working at McDonald's. That's not really dignified human labor.
Well, 15 he still
Oh,
won't
well, you
do
want
it.
dignified human
That's
labor.
right. That's right.
But 15 still won't do it.
Still won't do it, especially
Not here.
certainly in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And as I said, nowhere in the U.S. can anyone afford a going rate one-bedroom apartment if
Right,
they're
right.
working 40-hour week, earning minimum wage.
My daughter's earning $15 an hour right now, and she's couch surfing because
Yeah?
she doesn't have enough money to pay rent.
Yeah. Here's as I said, there are nearly 41 million people below the poverty line, and below half of the poverty line, which would be $12,170 for a family of four, is what they're basing this on.
That's insane.
$12,000 a year for a family of four. 18.5 million are living below that line.
Well, you're going to have real problems.
Merry Christmas, everybody!
I know.
When deindustrialization started in the late 60s and the early 70s, it hit the portions of the American population that the majority were perfectly willing to sacrifice. So the last people who got hired were African Americans. They were the first ones to get fired. And so through the 70s and 80s, it hadn't fully caught up to white America. It hadn't caught up to the majority. Now it is. I mean, now all of those people were very smug because they kept their job and somebody down the street lost it in the 70s. They're out of work too, and their kids and whatever. I mean, so
it's not because they're bad people.
No, but I mean, the good news is that at least we're having a kind of reckoning about this, right? When it was just black people, who were disproportionately suffering, I mean, the majority was fine.
Well, they
with that.
still are disproportionately suffering.
They are.
Yeah.
But 64% of the poor in the United States, the bottom 20%, are white. The majority of poor people in America are white. And but I don't want to get sidetracked with that. I'm saying at least now the economy is so bad, it's so unequal that we could talk about this.
But you're looking for ways, Paul said, how do we
do it?
How do we do it? And I think the skills, the education we're a service industry now. We've exported the jobs, and one of the reasons we did that was we could export the pollution along with those jobs. But so the services are what's left, and they require a certain degree of skill in order to provide those services. So, like I said, education is none of the solutions are something you can push a button, it's going to happen tomorrow. You just can't do that.
Sure.
Well, but I think that people are not really the service economy. By the way, that's old hat now. They talk about the experience economy now. Ooh, but the service economy,
The experience.
It's
Well, we're talking
That's
about
like-
alleviating poverty,
it's-
not turning everybody into a writing code or something.
Well, I think the experience economy is the most polite way you can say prostitution I've ever heard. But the service economy. My brother had the great line in that. He said, "The service economy means that I'm going to start working at McDonald's now, so that when we're all working at McDonald's, I'll be the manager."
Seniority.
Exactly, very typical older brother perspective. 415-663-8492. Call us.
So, to your earlier point about race, while a larger percentage of black people are living in poverty, in raw numbers, there are actually more white than black people below the poverty line, just because there are more white people, of course. But the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival.
Oh, boy.
Because this is run by two reverends, Reverend Dr. William Barber and the Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis. They are starting a campaign, a grassroots organizers, the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival to challenge the enmeshed evils of systemic racism, poverty, the war economy, ecological devastation, and our distorted national morality. Well,
Good luck.
Good to set your goals high, I guess. But as to what they're actually going to do, I don't know.
Well, I mean, you can do public works projects, and you could have a new Homestead Act, and you could do all kinds of things that would be the way government could intervene to cause capital formation, to cause stuff to get made and built, and then you have to employ people to make it and build it and work there. We don't want to do it. Well, we want somebody to do it. We want daddy, right?
Well, we've
So
gotten used to lower prices, though. People, if
Sure.
this stuff was made in the United States, everybody would have to adjust the fact that their goods would cost a lot more money.
Well, if you didn't have illegal immigration, it would cost more to buy any food product. It would cost more to dine out at a restaurant because, we are exploiting marginal populations in order to make things cheaper for ourselves. I mean, I think ultimately the problem is people don't care.
All over the world.
But, I wonder this. You were talking about marginal people being exploited. You go into a restaurant, at least in California, if you look in the kitchen, it's predominantly Hispanic. Mm-hmm. Now, how did that transformation take place that Anglo-Saxon, that all of a sudden it became an immigrant population in there? Why? What happened to those jobs? All of a sudden they became...
Well, I'll tell you, and actually, Robert Reich, please call in because you have something to do with this, former Secretary of Labor, Bob. Number is 663-8492, Bob. It's called NAFTA. And
Sweet talk him. Come on.
That's right. The then Secretary of Labor said it was a good idea. When I worked in kitchens in the Midwest when I was in college, I would talk to the Hispanics there. In that case, in the Midwest. I mean, this used to be Mexico, so much different tradition and story here in California. But
you're digging pretty deep on that one.
well, only 150 years. Ulysses S. Grant, who lived in Mendocino County once, he wrote in his beautiful memoir, which people should read, that the Civil War was divine retribution for the wickedness of the Mexican-American War, where we stole California. Thank you, Mexico. California's lovely. Anyway, back to the kitchen.
Yeah.
And I talked to these guys. Their parents were small farmers. And NAFTA meant that subsidized American grain could flood into Mexico without a tariff and put a generation of small farmers out of work. And their children, rather than doing the right thing, which was starve to death in Mexico, said, we want to
where
live.
the money is.
They came, and so
where the crops are.
They're dishwashers. Almost all of my new worked 240 an hour. They worked 80 hours a week at two different restaurant jobs, and they, lived as cheaply as possible, and they could send remittances back to Mexico. And
that's right. Not only are they earning that money on an exploitative wage, but they're actually sending money back to support a family. So okay.
Well,
so
NAFTA,
how do they
what
do
about
that?
family values?
Well, NAFTA calls
they
that, right?
They live, as immigrants always have, they live in communities that support them. They live 10 people to a room. They sleep 10 people to a room in cases where they're, in poverty and where they're just where they're sending everything back home to support their own families down south of the border. Yeah, terrible. When this flight from Mexico, of course they're going to go where the food and the money is. And
where they can get a job.
There was rice, corn, and beans subsidized by the U.S. sent down to Mexico, where that's what they grew.
Right. Well, and the Mexicans...
I was down there, even in Baja, which especially in Baja, I guess, because they can't grow very much there. It's the desert. But you see, you go to a restaurant or a taco stand, and you see bags of beans, and they're all U.S.
Yeah.
That was however long ago that was that I was down
these
there.
trade deals caused this problem. And so the real question is, how is it people from Jalisco who are born and raised in Jalisco and want to continue to live in Jalisco can leave Duluth and stop washing our dishes and survive in the place that they're from? And that's a tough question. I mean, I think that, the financial institutions, in particular banks, have been profiting off of this kind of exploitation of labor. And of course, we enjoy it to some extent as well in the form of cheap food. And when you dine out, it's less expensive, et cetera.
Price of an automobile. Look, Ford opened a plant. They're paying them a wage that would be as a miracle wage in Mexico. And now they want to penalize them for bringing those auto parts back into the country. So... There you go.
got me. I just, the
NAFTA, a wonderful
thing.
Bill Clinton.
Well, yeah, and the bank, the banks have been in debt, breaking up the governments basically of these countries as well, trying to get them to privatize government functions, whatever, saddling them with huge amounts of debt. The amount of debt that the banks feel they can lend to third world countries is the exact amount of their what they produce. So that everything that is produced in terms of wealth or income could be used for debt service. So they lend ridiculous amounts of money to these countries, which cause terrible problems. I mean, in Mexico, it really started in earnest in the late 70s and early 80s. But if you talk to a 50-year-old Mexican, you can ask Victor Reyes. Go find Victor Reyes. He's one who explained this to me. You've seen a radical transformation in just a few decades over the course of his life between what Mexico was, say, with huge problems it had back in the 60s and 70s. Obviously, I'm not saying you go back in time and that was a great place, but really atomized the society, made it much more violent and aggressive. And of course, as former President Felipe Calderon said, not to spend all of our time talking about Mexico, he said, very hard to deal with your drug problem when the world's biggest user lives next door.
Right next door.
But anyways, leaving Mexico to one side, huge poverty problems in this country, and I guess those where those people come from. They came here to work so that they can survive.
How dare they?
So my question is this: did they replace somebody that was doing that job already? So they added to the workforce, and thus did those people have another place to go, or how did this get transformed from what was a non-immigrant population doing these jobs to all of a sudden it was an immigrant population that was doing them?
Well,
is that because the wage was so low?
As far as things like stoop labor, where you're picking strawberries all day, every day for 3 months, the old saw that we always heard was white people don't want to do them jobs no more.
Well, nobody wants to do those jobs. It's just how desperate are you?
That's right.
But I think why is it that we have an agricultural sector that functions in that way? I don't think that that's necessarily a good thing. And by the way, talking about labor protections, the United Farm Workers basically collapsed. I think it's a museum in Arizona or something. I'm serious. Yeah, that sort of provides something for Cesar Chavez's widow and kids. Right. Interesting note: people forget that Cesar Chavez ripped apart the United Farm Workers because he became enamored with the ideas of one Charles Dietrich, and whose organization was called Synanon.
Really?
You may have heard. And he started using the game as a way to expose and drive, quote, socialists out of the United Farm Workers. He basically lost his mind in the 70s and 80s.
Wow.
So everybody's vision of Cesar Chavez.
So did Chuck Dietrich, by the way.
Well, yeah, exactly. They did it together. But our image of, when we think about migrant labor in California is of Cesar Chavez's courage and bravery and the people around him at that earlier period, not what actually happened to him in the 70s and 80s. But I think farm workers are just maybe the conditions have never been worse in terms of exposure to pesticides and herbicides and exposure to they don't have a union.
They don't have a union.
They
don't have to be paid, and a lot of cases they're paid in scrip that they have to spend.
Right.
Slave labor, basically.
Drive through the Salinas Valley or the Central Valley, you'll see them every day.
Yeah. Anyway, on a happier note, this
Let's have some organic strawberry, should we?
KWMR Point Reyes Station, 90.5 Point Reyes Station, 89.9 in Bolinas, 92.3 FM in the San Geronimo Valley. KWMR is supported by Point Reyes Vacation Rentals, a local family-run and community-minded vacation rental business with over 25 years of experience in lodging and hospitality management. Point Reyes Vacation Rentals rents and manages homes throughout West Marin. More information at 415-663-6113 or online at pointreyesvacationrentals.com. And support is also, of course, provided by our listener members and by the Point Reyes Light, an independent and locally owned newspaper telling West Marin's stories since 1948, featuring award-winning reporting, essays, opinions, a community events calendar, and the sheriff's calls. Office and newsroom open Monday through Thursday in downtown Inverness. Subscription, classifieds, calendar, and advertising information, plus letter to the editor forms are available at ptreyslight.com. That's PTREYES light.com or at 415-669 1200. And where are we? Here we are. We're also supported by Marin Agricultural Land Trust, a member-supported non-profit organization working to preserve Marin County farmland. On the web at malt.org. That's MALT.org. This is Let's Talk Call-In Radio. Give us a call, won't you? If you have solutions, you have any opinions about poverty in America, in this wonderful country of ours, in which 41 million people are living below this kind of arbitrary poverty line of $24,000 for a family of four. In a country where no one working a full week at minimum wage can afford a one-bedroom apartment.
Somebody's got to sleep outside, Paul. What's the big idea? Life under the stars, like summer camp. It's fun.
Someone's got to warm the pavement for us.
Indeed. Well, I'm going to slip if they don't do that.
Actually, there is a town, what's it called? Klamath Falls. They put in radiant heating in their sidewalks because they're sitting over
volcano
geothermal, and they piped it through their pavements, through their sidewalks, so that they wouldn't freeze in the winter. So if you're looking for a nice place to doss down, that is the place.
Calling all hobos.
The best place is the Marshall Post Office.
It is very toasty.
I've never seen
in
a
there.
lobby. Oh my God!
You're revealing all my
It's
tips.
so warm.
It's ridiculously warm. Well, I mean, here's the thing. Like, look how many people use food banks in West Marin. A huge amount of people use them. You know, you see, and these will be faces you know. This is not just the anonymous brown people that you don't know, but you see walking around. These are your neighbors in West Marin. And there's just, we're a very individualistic society. We don't really, we've been trained to kill our empathy or idea that we would share with someone else and have common interests or common needs or whatever. We're trained to think that we're just separate little individuals, and
but not at this time of year when we celebrate Christ's birth by buying wonderful presents for everybody.
Well, I don't have to listen to Christmas music because I live out here, which is great, and of course the weather is nicer. So I've killed Christmas off in my heart. I'm not even sentimental about it.
War on
Of course, if you want to get me gifts, that's fine.
I actually have joined you with that. I become a little Grinch-like about Christmas. I
just don't care. And then in the
I do want to see my family.
Yeah.
Well, do you want to
see your family?
Do you want to see my family? How about that? We'll trade. Hopefully they're not listening. Sorry, Mom. Sorry, Fred.
Call Fred. Come on, Fred. Call in. 415-663-8492. Tell us how you overcame poverty in your life.
Did he? Well, and a lot of people live on credit, right? What happened to the fact that incomes haven't risen, but people are still consuming lots of stuff? Well, debt just has exploded over the last 40 years. They say that the bottom half of the United States population, the bottom 50%, has 73% of all the debt. The wages stagnated, people lost jobs, or became more marginally employed or whatever, but all of a sudden the credit cards appeared, and the home loans, and the student loans, and the whatever. And then people in debt are slaves to their employers. I mean, that's the other problem with it, is it kills the spirit of independence or dynamism that you would have. I talked to people who are 18 who are telling me that they want to go into this field because they can make some money, and they don't want to take any risks. And you think, if your 18-year-olds don't want to take any risks, how is the culture going to move? What are you going to do? So, whereas for the boomers, there was a very wealthy time, maybe the wealthiest time in human history, there in the 50s and 60s for Americans, certainly, for white Americans, and there was a tremendous spirit of a feeling of being carefree, but also of taking risks, doing things that people wouldn't do today. I was making a political ad at the Berkeley Flea Market, or technically the Oakland Flea Market. Yeah, I guess the Oakland's on the other side of the street. And these two young girls came, and they were in their Cal sweatshirts, so like freshmen or something like that. This is 7 years ago now. And they did the little interview that we wanted for the political ad. It was very slanted, right? And it was against Pacific Gas and Electric, who the ad was attacking. And then we continued just, interviewing more people. And they came back, and they said, could you not use us? Because that might hurt our attempts to get a job later on. And I just thought, that's what your 18-year-olds are doing? What kind of a culture or society do you have?
Yeah, but wait
and
a
yet
second.
they're on Facebook.
Yeah, right. That's right.
I've got to take issue with what you say that nobody's taking a risk these days.
Physical risks, moral risks, no, but it's physical risks. People like to jump off things and climb things and surf on things.
I'm talking about entrepreneurial risk taking. We're talking about jobs now. We're talking about poverty. I think that there are more entrepreneurial risk taking now than ever before. Frankly,
What would be an example of that?
people taking the risk to start a business, doing something other than staying straight labor, working for somebody else.
I'm doing that right now.
There's a lot of people that are starting businesses.
So we have a sample of one so far. Other examples of this? Are you talking about just somewhere in the country or here in Point Reyes?
Even in this town, I noticed that at Sarima's shop, print ink, paper, plate. There's some people that are doing little pop-up businesses.
Right.
It's a way to get started is to start small, and so that's happening right here in Point Reyes.
But I think you're saying that people are having more opportunities to buy more stuff. I don't really see how that gets us anywhere. But
well, there are other kind of businesses besides product-based businesses. For example, I coach artists.
Artist coach.
I'm an artist coach.
Do you have a whistle and a hat?
Again, that's
I have a whip.
service economy. Though.
I have a whip.
Everybody can't be part of the service
Well, you can charge more if you do it down in San Francisco.
We're talking about people who need jobs in the non-service economy. I mean, everybody cannot be a mentor or whatever.
Right.
Only me.
The schools need to have trained people for different things. It doesn't make any sense to not include jobs where people can use their hands.
Sure. Well, the
somebody
education
comes out of school and they don't know how to do something.
Well, because it was an education system designed to.
I love this because that's what I do.
Well,
there are a lot of people who don't know how to fix anything or make anything, and thank goodness for that. Otherwise,
sorry.
You mean those people who actually also have money to pay you? I think you need to add that. Not just people who have problems with a little Aladdin's lamp on their dashboard. But the school system was designed to make factory workers.
The Aladdin. I'm sorry, that was.
If we have to mention the Aladdin.
He made a reference to the Aladdin. He called me up one day.
Okay, what's the story?
He has a car, and this warning light appeared on the dashboard, and he calls up and he says, "What is this Aladdin's lamp that's on my dashboard?" It's the oil light, right? The oil can.
Oh, the oil can.
So there you are.
Oh, cute.
Wow.
Oh,
That's a wonderful
cute.
story. It's a wonderful Christmas story.
Who knows? Oh, we're being attacked.
Do we have a guest?
What are you doing?
Well,
There's an interloper in the studio. Terrorists are here.
I heard someone was looking for the McDonald's manager.
Oh, there he is. A McDonald's manager here, and just to maintain the illusion, could you use the office phone and call into the show? 663-8492. 663-8492.
We don't know who that was. Some CIA operative.
So who's older? Are you the eldest?
No.
Or is your brother?
No, he's older than me.
So then you're the evil twin, whereas he's the good guy?
No, we're not twins.
That you were retribution?
Retribution. I don't know what's going on there, Stephen.
Anyway, we were talking about
poverty,
getting out of the service economy, but what is there left?
No.
What manufacturing? People should go into manufacturing.
That doesn't exist
Where
anymore.
do they do it?
And when they are manufacturing, we're turning
It's
to
small
to
artisanal.
Well, the big companies are turning to robots, and
Well, sure, but I mean, here's the
they
thing.
don't want to do this by hand anymore.
Well, a lot of what people fetishize.
They don't want to pay people.
Well, right. What they fetishize about places like West Marin is just those artisanal trades. I've got a neighbor that is a blacksmith, makes his own toenail clippers, and all that stuff, which is great. But when you have to think about the only thing, the only thing that supports that is
toenail clippers.
That's
the best you can do.
Whatever.
Wrought iron toenail clippers.
Wrought iron toenail clippers. That was a plug. I'm trying to help them sell those. Or whatever. I mean, people want to do their own gardening and raise their own food and be engaged in different crafts and things like that. That's all great. But you have to look at what supports all that. What supports it is one of the largest concentrations of wealth in the world. It's one of the wealthiest countries in the entire counties in the entire country. And you look at the hills, and I can rattle off the robber barons' last names and the corporations that allow these people to. I just left acupuncture. I'm headed to reflexology. Well, Grandpa had to kill a million poor people in order for you to be that groovy, and so there's a problem there. Well, how do we translate all this artisanal cool stuff, making the food and clothing and all the things people need to start building, building techniques and things like that, to places with actual poor people? Because the rich people can have this fantasia of, do it their DIY. But really, it's how do we go into these burned out suburbs and urban areas and figure out, well, how do you raise that wonderful food here? And how do you build with those materials that are in that style?
And there are people doing that on a small scale, little patches of hope.
I
think we have a caller, by the way.
Oh, we do have a caller.
Caller, you're on the air. What's your name, please? What name are you using today?
My name is Spence.
Spence. Gracious. Spence. Is this the late night romantic call-in line? Because that's not until...
What's up, Spence?
Well, somebody said something about prostitution earlier, so...
No, that's the experience economy.
Oh,
the experience economy.
I have two questions. Well, one's a comment, the other's a question. The comment, Steve had mentioned something earlier in the program about charter schools and how it really was kind of a euphemism to take federal funds and send them to religious institutions. I actually disagree with that. What it is big business, and charter schools are for-profit, and everything is based on the bottom line. So, there was an example of this even before the charter phenomenon called Edison schools, and they would simply count the number of basketballs, and if it was bean counting, you only had 7 basketballs you were allotted for the year, so that's all you got in the gym class and things of that nature. The other one, I would just pose a question to the panel writ large, which is the qualitative nature of work, and that is something that I'd be interested to hear about. I mean, we talk about, we should just be paid more for these particular jobs, say in the service economy and so forth. But, seldom do we ever ask ourselves, what is the value of the work we do? What is the essential nature of it? And I would just like to hear all of you comment on that.
You couldn't get a comment because that calls for a serious answer.
Well, it's a Cold War phenomenon. You're not supposed to ask what your job is. You're supposed to do your job. And so we've lost that. I'll give you a classic example of this. I'm listening to NPR the other day, and for my sins, and this is the sentence. It's a group of female reporters. Maybe they're entrepreneurs. Who knows? We're in Bangladesh reporting, and the sentence goes like this: something like, female workers sexually harassed at Bangladeshi sweatshop. Now, the important word in that sentence is not sexually harassed. It's sweatshop.
Sweatshop.
But we're so inured to this idea that this is the way people have to work and this is just reality that we'd try and make a more humane sweatshop. You should have a sweatshop in which nobody abuses
Nobody
you.
sweats.
Nobody sweats. That's right. And so we're so deeply embedded in that you're thinking about what the quality of the work rather than how much money are you making is so outside of our ken. People don't do it.
I just woke up to the idea of victim blaming. Victim blaming happens a lot in this country regarding any number of things, but in this case, it's the economy, and the poverty is the victim. The people in poverty are the victims, and yet they get somehow blamed, like there's something wrong with them.
Welfare queens.
They're less than. They're
not
uneducated.
Not entrepreneurial enough. They're not willing to sell enough of their soul.
Yes, right. And
Stephen loves buzzwords.
You
like
do that just for me, right?
Yeah, I did. The entrepreneur is such a buzzword, and people love it. So schools are now opening centers for entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship schools and all this nonsense. Pure neoliberal nightmare.
Well, what I mean by entrepreneurial,
and it means between taker, which means middleman.
But entrepreneurial means it could mean as simple as somebody going into business he's been a landscape. Worked as a landscaper. Now he's decided to buy a truck and start a business. That's entrepreneurial skills. It's not such magic.
A small business.
But you're. I mean, I'm using the way in which it's used as a buzzword today. When these schools, these very expensive schools, are opening up schools of entrepreneurship.
I agree with you.
They're talking about this new nightmare reality where you are a personal brand. and your whole life activity is to learn how to sell yourself to a marketplace.
Like Donald Trump.
He's just insane.
But, I just want to say one other thing. The challenge is not to get people off of Skid Row. The challenge is getting people who are before that happens to them. Okay? That's
Right.
when you're talking about poverty. It's too late by the time they hit Skid Row. These are people who have lost all ambition and feeding themselves the next day, if they can, is their goal. It's the people you want to before that happens that is the real challenge to find them the means to stay above it.
Well, there are a lot of
Right.
charitable organizations that do good
And
work
how-
there.
No. Yeah,
Please, somebody
absolutely
call in
right.
and take issue with me.
Well, Fred's here. Take issue with Stephen, would you, Fred?
But I don't
Here.
have
Still there.
an essential issue with this, but actually,
But so qualitative. We'd all love to have a job that fulfills our dreams and our talents and uses our time to the perfect nth degree, in which we feel fulfilled, and we wouldn't mind working 15 hours a day because it's what we're made of. Like artists are
Right,
like that.
right.
But I don't know. Has that ever been a reality? I don't mind what I do. I've been doing it for a long time. I'm just good at fixing things, and it kind of gives me a little satisfaction when I've.
That and the
And a
heroin.
certain amount of freedom in being your own boss.
Well,
Yeah.
I was talking to Ingrid Noyes the other day. She lived in Alaska for a long time. A lot of people down here go and live in Alaska a bit. But she said the interesting thing about it, and this would be a way of thinking about it, how an economy might function differently. There isn't as much cash work. People are poorer, but everybody knows how to do stuff. Right. If your car breaks down, you have to be able to figure out what is going wrong here and deal with it. So I grew up in a world which, you have zero skills. You don't know how to do anything.
And that's getting worse.
Yeah, I suppose. What do you mean?
It
Me
is.
personally, or
No, not you, Charles.
Well, they're starting to. I mean, the emphasis now is on STEM, right? And it's all about coding and right?
Computers.
You got to be a coder.
You don't
That's
have
the
to
only
know
way
how
to make money.
Right? You don't have to know how to spell. You don't.
it's so bizarre.
Nobody knows how to cook.
Memorize. The thing is, it also attacks your memory because you say, well,
Right?
the machine will
You're
know.
not building your brain.
It's scary. And, nobody had smartphones until last Thursday. Now every 9-year-old grandpa in Inverness is on Grindr. How did that happen? Nobody noticed? I mean, like a week ago, nobody had these things, and now they're people's whole lives. They can't.
What's Grinder? I'm sorry.
Grindr is coffee.
You don't
grinder.
want to know.
Yeah, it's a way in which gay men can find each other for
Okay,
to
got
have
it.
sex. There you go.
Oh, okay.
Not all the grandpas in Inverness, just lots of them. Dewey is a grandpa now. Sorry, Dewey.
Thank you for filling us in on that.
That would be very
so
good.
how does that work for you?
Fabulous. Except for no self-interception
Well-
of Marshall, so I'm very lonely.
Tell me if I'm wrong.
the essential role of myth in all of this.
Myth.
Myth.
Well, we talk about like social Darwinism, like people who don't have money are losers, they deserve what they get, or they're genetically deficient, or they're whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Is that,
I think it's back to your comment on entrepreneurialism, that there are certain myths that we don't even recognize in American society, namely because we don't read history, but the essential myth being that, there's this increased upward social mobility,
Right.
and that everybody can achieve that.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something I think we take as the gospel in this country, and it's just your whole
It's not
program.
true anymore, yeah.
Far from the truth.
Well,
The American dream.
I told my students, they were horrified. I taught for 1 year at a private school.
Uh-oh.
And
Did you hang up, Fred?
oh, dear. Fred from Kandahar province there. I told my students that Spence, that those students would not have the same material prosperity as their parents. That would American wealth peaked, and it peaked with the boomers basically, and they were like horrified. They're like, what? You mean I don't get like a bigger house or, 2 houses or what? I mean, it's a private school. I mean, the kids were, came from some privilege, but they were just disgusted by it. They were just horrified by this idea. But
I just a short story I'd like to tell you. There is a Indian restaurant in Novato, great food. Was a young kid I met there who was from Nepal, spoke almost no English, okay? They bring relatives over.
Sure.
They live there. So he decided that he wanted to learn English. He started going to a church so he could speak a lot of English to people. They had whatever. And then I watched his English improve dramatically over a 2-year period. He worked in the restaurant, and then he got another job working in Old Navy before it opened, stocking shelves. Okay, and his aim was to go to junior college and learn computer skills. So I watched over this period of time this kid learn English, became very, very proficient in English. He knew almost nothing when he came. Wow. He had 2 jobs, and he was off. He moved out of the apartment where everybody lives. He got his own place, bought a car, and he's going to junior college. So.
You could be a speechwriter for Reagan.
I think everybody just needs to be an immigrant again.
Well, you could have been Ronald Reagan's speechwriter. Too bad he's dead.
This is a true story.
Well, look, this Horatio Alger up by your bootstraps.
Not.
Of course it happens.
It does happen.
It does happen.
It's an immigrant story is what it is.
So we should.
Well, I think it's also easier for somebody who's flying solo to do these kind of things. If, like when I was a single mom, I was very paycheck to paycheck, and I'd have to periodically say, Dad, may I have some money? And he'd say, well, how's your budget looking? You better think about these things. And the reality was that I only had so much money and I had so much expense, And then I actually went to try to get, food stamps and, help from the government. They make it so hard.
That was then.
So hard.
Even worse now.
I ended up not doing it.
That's deliberate.
Because it was so hard.
No, they discuss this internally. My experience is just I had a girlfriend who was a Vista, was part of a good LBJ program in Chicago, and had to, when as a Vista you get on welfare, you participate in all those programs, and you have like a poverty wage, and you do work. And she described how the internal processes worked, that they deliberately are rude and difficult and whatever the employees are to keep as many people off welfare as possible. So, I mean, it's a real nightmare kind of scenario where the government, with this idea of we need to assist people, is deliberately being hostile toward them. So that they will keep the numbers of people actually receiving a benefit to an absolute minimum.
I wonder where the word welfare, how that got into it. It's really general assistance, and all of a sudden everybody started calling it welfare.
Right. Well, there was a lot of branding that is involved in this.
We used to call it in England.
You had the character of Lee Atwater, lovely guy, a friend of Paul Manafort and Roger Stone, who did a blind interview with the University of North Carolina back in the early '80s after he died of brain cancer. How poetic is that? In the early '90s, they released his identity, and I won't use the word that's considered very offensive now to say the N-word, but this was the word that he was using to describe it. He said, "You want to win elections in the South? You just said the N-word, right?" And after a while, he couldn't do that. That became unacceptable. So you'd say, "We're going to reduce welfare," because everybody would understand that means that it would disproportionately hurt who? Black people. And he said, finally, it became so subtle. And he's talking about the Reagan era, that all you had to say was that you're going to cut taxes, because people connected their mind that lower taxes meant lower social benefits for poor people, which disproportionately meant black people. And said that's what worked in the South. Just say cut taxes. Everybody knows it's an expression of hostility toward blacks.
Now it's an expression of hostility towards everyone.
Which is good news.
Right.
70% of the population. So it's time for pitchforks and...
One thing would be terrifying is if Donald Trump actually gets people jobs. That would be terrifying. The problem with Hitler was he got people jobs. And the good thing about Trump is I don't think he will. I think he'll continue to crater the economy and increase economic suffering of people rather than, good Lord, if he actually did cause some kind of economic miracle to happen, that's much more terrifying to me. Then
he'll stay in.
Then he'll stay in. Then maybe he decides we need Poland too.
I thought you meant that people will start buying more stuff.
Well, I mean, we have this relationship with material goods, which is very emotional and psychological. People need to buy in order to soothe themselves. And you see, that relationship people have to consumption, which you can break yourself of. It's easy if you're also broke. I mean, it's much easier for me to do. If I had big piles of money, sure, I would be much more tempted to.
But this time of year, especially, I mean, consume. And there, of course, the next move after this budget, next year, they'll be coming after Social Security and Medicare and blaming that for the $1 trillion deficit that they just created. So,
like I
please, everybody support non-profits that are working to help the homeless and the poor.
That's me. That's a nonprofit of one. Cut out the middleman. Cut out the NGO entrepreneur and just give money directly to Charles Schultz. You can send mail general delivery to Marshall, California 94940.
Look
Shelley
up
said
the
something.
Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. Maybe it'll help. Westmoreland Senior Services right next door.
I'm heading over to
Our,
senior lunch
community services.
after this.
Ah, excellent. You're going to be making it?
Shelley said something, though. She mentioned the word of support. Going back to this same story I told, he had a whole group of support when he came over here. It's a whole movement of bringing people over from India, from Nepal, and they support each other. And maybe that's one of the reasons it's so hard. We don't have a support system. I'm talking about family support, a common ideal, working for the same goal.
You mean Americans, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
People born in America don't have that same tradition of...
Well, the thing is, life under empire, in this case our empire, the American empire, causes huge metaphysical damage to people who participate in it. So yeah, you have big bags of cash lying around, and your kids are a nightmare, and they hate you, and whatever. I mean, there's a malaise kind of in the culture I think came from what happens to the human spirit when you live in an empire that likes to blow other countries up on a regular basis. And we get rich off it.
And with that,
Merry Christmas,
Merry
everyone.
Christmas.
And I hope you have a wonderful weekend, Christmas weekend, and Hanukkah, and Kwanzaa, and Festivus.
For the rest of us.
It's on, Tuesday? Tuesday, I believe.
I thought
It's
it was
Boxing
after
Day.
Christmas.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
Boxing Day. Happy Boxing Day. And we'll see you before the new year, so we'll be back next Thursday. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Shelley. Thank you, Stephen.
and thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.
And Merry Crimble, one and all, and don't spend too much on presents. Come on now.
For me, spend money on presents
that
for me.
The people you're going to give them to have everything already. So please, if
Yeah,
you're going to
more for the landfill.
if you're going to do anything, just give money to non-profits that are helping people survive the winter. Just imagine sleeping on the ground this morning.
Oh, well, that
Anyway.
definitely did happen.
KWMR does not take a stand on any of the issues discussed on Let's Talk. Opinions expressed on this program are those of the hosts and callers and don't necessarily reflect the views of KWMR, its board of directors, underwriters, or members. We'll be back next week. Thank you, everybody. Merry Crimble, and we'll leave you with this.